And what's so interesting about both Tesla and particularly Bitcoin or gold is it has the embedded savior within it. And because it's money itself, it's not like a stock because you've got nowhere valuing it really. Yes, we have the stock to flow and a bunch of charts, but really it's Metcalfe's law. It's just an adoption of trust. And how far can that go? If that trust collapses, then it's worth nothing. Same with all money. Same with gold itself. If we don't trust gold, if we don't believe gold has value, it has no value. So there's that kind of whole embedded thing. Tesla, what's interesting about Tesla, it has an embedded kind of God philosophy in it as well, which is that this technology is going to change the world.
Right.
And yes, it is going to change the world, but does all the profit accrue to Tesla? No, but the narrative does. And so it's why these things have been so successful, because again, they're all about a future change. Apple doesn't get that because it doesn't have that narrative. It doesn't have, if you invest in Apple, everything's going to change and things will get better. So if you're a millennial and you can see the issues with climate change and you want to do something about it and you're angry because the baby boomers don't, and governments are still pandering to the baby boomers, but the younger people all want to do something about it, well, Tesla is the way to drive your narrative. And Bitcoin is the same for those people who've been screwed over by this wage deflation and globalization and all of this thing. Bitcoin is the one God that could save them.
Right.
Because they can get a chance to accumulate wealth and they don't get a chance. And I think that's true. I don't think it's a false narrative necessarily. I don't think Tesla is a false narrative. Tesla's more difficult because it's a stock, and he's a showman and a bit of a fraud. But what that whole thing stands for, he's now got access to unlimited capital, so he's fine. So that's not going to go wrong from here. Sure, it can fall in price, but this Bitcoin narrative is really interesting because it drives at the heart of everything being wrong, and there's something that can change it. Gold favors people with the politics of nostalgia. If we only went back to how it was, and they look back and think the 1950s was a glorious time. Well, guess what? In the 1950s, none of these baby boomers were in the workforce. They hadn't had to borrow money. Of course, it was a better time in some respect. Obviously, not really either in longevity of life and quality of life terms, but that's how they perceive it. So gold has that nostalgia about it when the times were better, and Bitcoin has that optimism about it, is this could be different. And the kind of crypto anarchists and others hook onto the narrative of we could have a different way. And I keep saying to people, stop thinking about what you think it's all about, and you need to follow what it is actually about, because people want it to be this libertarian, unregulated world, but that's not happening.
Yeah. I mean, I would be one of those people for sure, but from a philosophical standpoint. But I look at reality, and I did a video last week, and I went through that full reserve and free banking and whatnot, and people that are hard money folks, they want there to be a limit to the supply of money. But they don't realize that even under the gold standard, with free banking, when there was no government whatsoever, we had fractional reserve banking, so they could increase the supply of money. And when we were under the gold standard, going back to what Hume was saying, he was the first one I found that really thought about the flows with gold going from one country to the other, where there would be more gold going to XYZ country. Therefore, the money supply would increase, prices would increase. And although it wasn't a global phenomenon, you would still have money supply increasing when there was a scarce amount of quote unquote money. It's still a system that I don't think we can get away from. But go ahead.
And to go back to your philosophical discussion about, okay, what could that world look like? Again, the Eurodollar market existed, and you're dead right. And Jeff Stein's dead right. It existed because there was not enough dollars and people needed access to it. So if you go to a Bitcoin system, people want access to more of it. And so we will see, as we're seeing already, the rise of DeFi, the rise of yield curves, the rise of leverage, the rise of derivatives, the rise of other lending based on the back of it. And so the cycle will repeat.
Yeah. And how do you think social media plays into what we were just talking about. When we were going over, let's say the cult pros and cons with Tesla or Bitcoin, I think, going back to what Janos was saying, and he always says, well, Enron was a cult-like stock. And I'm not comparing Enron to Tesla or Bitcoin, but I was thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, but we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Instagram. We didn't have all these ways of connecting in real time. Is it different now to where back then the cult component may have been a negative, but maybe now it's a positive? Or is it a positive short term and a negative long term? I don't know.
Well, for Bitcoin itself, it's all about adoption. Does the narrative win adoption? And I've said the crypto anarchist or some of these narratives won't win full adoption. So they're going to have to allow regulation and institutions to bring full adoption. So if full adoption is what you want, then you have to bring more people into your religion. And it's a religion of trust in money. And I don't have a problem with it at all. So I'm not using it as a slur against Bitcoin. I think it's a feature, not a bug. It gets a little too tribal, which is the bug for me. But social media, this is where it gets difficult, because it's, again, the rise of behavioral economics is you can affect different people by telling them different stories. And you can have multiple narratives at the same time. And that's what's going on in the crypto space. It becomes you versus me, because you like Ethereum and I like Ripple and somebody else like XRP. And what it becomes is I want my value system to go up because I'm desperate to make money. And therefore, my answer online is it's to the exclusion of all others. Now, those of us who are investors have never looked at the world that way, because that would be ridiculous. But when you're fighting for your own system of money and a way of making your own wealth, you're driven by those narratives to say it's us versus you, because you want more of the capital flow. Now, I think that's also a feature of 2016-17 bull markets, when you didn't really know who was going to win out in this. But right now, it seems to be opening out. And as institutional money comes in, there's plenty of opportunity for tons of these projects to do well and tons of them to fail in the perfect way that capital systems allocate capital over time. So I just don't worry about that. But I understand from the beginning, in that world between, let's say, 2013 to 2017, it was a fight for who can get the most trust for their network.
Right.
Same with social media, why Facebook won and Friends reunited didn't.
Yeah.
It's who could drive the most trust and the most connections.
Yeah, I just think that social media gives human beings just that echo chamber, and it enforces it through their algorithm. And you create that echo chamber with this narrative that you're referring to, and it exacerbates it 1,000 times. And it's just interesting to see how that will play out over the long run in the actual price of XYZ asset.
Yeah, I mean, dead right. And then we've seen that this kind of feeling of unease that's been driven by some of the factors I've talked about has also made people more tribal, and us versus them. And it's become politically tribal as well. So everything gets supercharged, much more than it normally would do. People are much less tolerant of each other now because of these super narratives that are grabbing hold of whole large groups of people online in different ways, whether it's anti-vaxxers or whether it's crypto enthusiasts or whether it's, whatever it may be. There's these super narratives and you can't escape them. I mean, my Twitter feed I can barely use any longer because it's now swamped by crypto stuff. Yeah. So I'm missing, if you're writing a comment on bonds, I don't see it right now because of the algorithm, and it's really hard.
Yeah. I want to switch gears because I know we're limited on time, and I've got just a million questions that I wanted to ask you today. These moments for me are so precious to have the opportunity to sit down and talk to you. And I want to steal a question from Bill Fleckenstein. I want to give him all the credit. And he brought this up with Jim Rogers, who's my favorite investor of all time, with your good buddy Grant Williams on his podcast, The Endgame. And it's a question that I've heard Bill ask quite a few times. And that's what happens in Japan or to the yen if they have a debt jubilee?
The question is, what happens to the Japanese capital base? Do they invest at home or go abroad. It's a simpler question as that. And my guess is if there is no Japanese government bond market, so we've called it all quits, we're down to zero debt.